Hey folks, good morning. It's Military Gun Guy here. We are going to be effecting a fairly intensive repair on this rifle. I'll give you a little bit of history on it. This is a Danish 1889 Gewehr. Was Gewehr 89 actually? It's the Danish Krag. Okay. You can see that this rifle is actually in 3 pieces. Okay, this is a duffel cut. Typically, when soldiers would bring a firearm home from overseas, they would take the screws out, they would cut it under a band, and they would stick it in their duffel bags. This was so that they could kind of, I guess, sneak it over the border, depending on where they served. Unfortunately, today, soldiers are no longer allowed to do that, which is kind of sad because I'm sure that a lot of the weapons that the soldiers are encountering have a ton of history and are quite interesting, but leave it to our government to change things. So anyway, but back in the day, a soldier was allowed to bring over firearms from overseas. I'm not exactly sure when this stopped. I don't know. I think maybe it might have been Vietnam, maybe before that. This rifle is all matching. It's in absolutely beautiful shape, with the exception of this very nasty crack, as you can see. Okay, this had nails that they look period correct, and basically nails had been hammered, and you can see some of the holes, but nails had been hammered into the wrist to effect a repair. Unfortunately, a repair like that is not very strong, if at all, especially due to just the normal recoil of a rifle. So this would have fallen apart quite quickly. This rifle was relegated to wall hanger status, but being that it is all matching, it is in outstanding condition, with the exception of the broken wrist, and the bore looks like almost new, even though dies and brass and whatnot are hard to come by. I actually want to bring this back to life. So this is going to be a 2 to 3 part repair. You can see when you put the stock back together, okay, there's a nice large chunk that's missing that's over time had been lost. The other problem, if you look, is you can see where, again, there's some missing wood. This needs to be clamped quite securely. They had put nails all throughout the stock itself to try to secure it. I don't know if this was an arsenal repair, or I would imagine if it was an arsenal repair, they would have just trashed the stock. So it might have been something done maybe if the soldier got home and saw that it had cracked and just decided to sort of fix it. But nevertheless, we are going to make this repair mostly invisible. Now, normally I like to strip stocks completely. So when I first got it, and I'm not going to show it to you because anybody can do this at home, I use this stuff, touch strip. You can use any sort of stripper, it doesn't really matter. I stripped it thoroughly. I got all of the original finish off of it, and I actually sent it a couple of trips through the dishwasher. Please do this when your dishes are not in there. Do this, and when your wife's not home. The heat boils or not boils, but sort of brings a lot of the grease and oil to the surface. Again, this rifle is 100 years old. It is an antique. You do have to be careful sometimes because it will start to cause cracks in the stock. Obviously easily fixed. Some of these cracks are hairline and nearly invisible, but we will fix those as well. So some of the things that are going to be done is, at first, what we're going to do is we are going to epoxy the crack itself, and then we're going to bind it together, and we're going to make the wrist close to one piece. Then we're going to use brass screws. Okay. What we're going to have to do is you have to look, when you're fixing a wrist like this, you're going to have to look to see where you have the most meat. So you can see there's a decent amount of meat here, but obviously we have all the inlets for the receiver parts. So once this is done and this is nice and tight, we're going to drill and countersink a screw right about there okay? And then underneath, we're going to drill and countersink a screw right about here. And it's going to go through the wrist. Actually, we're going to probably have to go right about here. It's going to go through the wrist, and then we're going to set the heads of the screws below the surface. You always use brass because brass won't rust in case any water gets into your stock. We're going to countersink the heads, and then we're going to use walnut plugs to plug the holes. In order to get, and I'm sure many of you have seen stocks that have nails hammered into it. Those are really kind of a bitch to get out. What I used was just a regular screwdriver, and I basically kind of dug under the wood to pry the screw out, and then I used, I think these might be linesman's pliers, I could be wrong, to basically grab the nail head like that, and you can kind of yank it out. You will get, no fear, you will be damaging the stock, and if you look closely, you can see a little bit of damage there. The nice thing is when you run the stock through the dishwasher, the heat actually causes the wood to swell up. This here was very highly compressed. You can kind of see how rough it was. And this was just from age and use. The soldiers may have, knocked the snow, this is from Denmark, snow out of their boots or something. This kind of damage is common on the K31 Swiss rifles. But the hot water from the dishwasher actually will swell this up, which is nice because it requires less finishing work to actually clean this back up. This does have a nice stock disc. It's from the, upside down, it's from the 9th Infantry Regiment. This is rifle number 11582. So what we're going to be using is our faithful DevCon epoxy resin. Again, you can get on eBay pretty much anywhere. And then after that, once that dries, we're going to clamp it together as tightly as we can. You can use surgical tubing. I'm going to be using some clamps like this or like this. Come here. You can use surgical tubing, anything that will get around that wrist and tighten it up. The other thing you can also use, and I forgot to bring it out, but I'll go get it, is string. You can put wax paper around the wrist. Once the epoxy's in, it's going to be squeezing out of everything, and it's going to make a mess. And then you basically wrap your around here, and as you're tightening it, it actually will start to tighten all the parts, and then you can use these clamps to kind of get a final finish on it. The other big problem you're going to run into is the wood. This wood was about 100 years old. Finding wood that is similar is a bit difficult unless you have donor stocks. This happens to be a German Gewehr 88. This was made around the same time period. This also is a walnut stock. This stock has a lot of, you can see kind of almost to where it changes color a little bit. It has what's called figure or curl in it. This will be a beautiful stock once it's done. It'll have a lot of character and life in it. But the trick is these missing pieces is to find pieces of wood that will actually match. If you want to lay these two side by side, the wood's pretty similar, once it's cleaned and stained a little bit more. So I'll probably be taking, I have a couple of extra 4Ns for this, and I'll probably use the darker of the two. I'll probably take in some pieces from this to fix the missing chunks of wood. I also have walnut plugs that I'll be using to plug the holes for the screws. And when we're done and everything's back together and the epoxy's dry, the screws are in, everything is nice and tight, you'll actually find that this will be a very, very solid repair that should not break at all if you do it correctly. You can tell I also have some black walnut, some different walnut blanks. And again, the trick when you're fixing chunks of wood that are missing is to replicate the grain. Obviously, you don't want it like this. If your grain runs this way, you don't want to put it like this. You're going to actually want to make it around like that. This wood's a little more red. This wood is a little more kind of dull, but also, this wood's 100 years old. It's been subjected to everything, whereas this wood's like brand new. So what will be happening is today I'm going to show you how to fix the wrist, wrap it, and then part 2 will be drilling the actual holes and screwing the parts of the stock together. These should be deeper, so I'm going to use a rasp, and I'm going to recut these grasping grooves, because you can tell just age and whatnot they're kind of faded. And then finally, once the wrist is done, actually it's going to be like a 3-part repair. Then I'll show you, I've showed you before, but I'll show you on this one, how to fix the duffel cut. And that'll be basically laying this on its top, drilling 2 holes for, drilling 2 holes for brass screws, putting the brass screws in there, and then matching it up to this piece here to where it becomes one nice solid repair. And then once your seam is cleaned up and you put your barrel band over it, this repair will pretty much be invisible, and it'll be strong because it's in a sort of a non-pressure area, even though obviously you want this to, last. Something else I was also thinking, because as every repair is different, something else I was also thinking was possibly inletting a bit of a channel and laying a piece of dowel in there. You can actually do just as good of a repair. Something, if you want, is you can drill a hole into the side. You'd have to obviously miss some of this stuff. Drill a hole into the side, insert a dowel, drill another hole, insert a dowel. You can finish this with walnut plugs, and then you can put the screws on top of it if you're really anal retentive. The screws obviously will power right through the dowel, but the dowel will actually give it some added strength. You can drill the holes a little bit smaller than the size of the hole once the wrist is fixed, or once the wrist is together, and then pound this in, and then just basically finish it. Being that it's wood, obviously it's just going to sort of disappear. But again, you can put this at various angles and clean it up. If you need to drill through this rear hole, if you need to reinforce past the hole, you can do that. And then you can also, this fits almost perfectly. Okay, and you can actually reinforce it through there, and then you'd have to just re-drill the hole for your rear trigger guard screw. And that can be done with the trigger guard installed, so you have a little bit of a guide. So there's a lot of different ways we can fix this. The main thing is we're going to get, we've gotten all the oil and grease out of this. We're going to just slather this with epoxy, and then we're going to wrap it nice and tight, put some wax paper on it so nothing sticks to itself, and then we'll come back and probably tomorrow, and this should be at least together enough to where we can start working on it and making this thing back to one piece. People ask me what I use when I clean. For a rifle stock like this, you always start by stripping it. Spot matching, something like that, is really, really tedious. So I strip all the finish off, thoroughly scrub it. I use these pads. You can get these from Home Depot or whatnot. This one I got from, what the hell was it? Dale McFadden Dale. It's a local place in Vegas that sells specialty hardware. But any one of these scrubbing pads will work. And then I follow up with scrubbing bubbles. I know it seems sort of simple, but actually the stuff works phenomenal. It bubbles into the wood. It gets a lot of the grime and grease off. Sometimes you see stuff just coming off. If you're scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing and hosing and scrubbing and you're still getting shit out of your stock, I would recommend a trip through the dishwasher. Put your stock on the top rack. Put it on the hottest setting that you can take. I use the pillow packs. You can throw 2 of those little pillow packs into your dishwasher and let it run. Usually about an hour later. Try not to put it on the. Try to avoid the heat setting on the dry. Take it out before it gets to the dry setting. By then it'll have basically melted a lot of the stuff away. The heat just sort of brings all that crap to the surface, and the phosphate and whatnot in the soap will actually kind of scour it away. The reason you want to use the top rack is because, again, you don't want to start, if these parts start to flake and dry out, you don't want to have these parts start going down your drain, because that's just more work for you. So when we're back, I'm going to get this all slathered up with some epoxy. We'll get it tightened down and show you how the repair looks, and then we'll go from there. So stay tuned. Okay, so we are back. With this repair, this is going to be a sliding repair. You're not just going to slap that on. You're actually going to try to mate the pieces of broken wood up. Something also that is a good idea to do, if you can, is see if your clamps are going to hold. In this case, the pieces of wood that are broken sort of are in a parallel pattern. So I'm just going to put this on there temporarily. And this is also good. See, that actually holds pretty well. Okay. And again, you want some good clamping action. You can see even with this clamped where the wood over time has kind of popped itself out. Again, once this is all together, you're going to have some high spots. You're going to dress all that up when you're done. But you're going to be fixing this to where the repair is nearly impossible. So you have your broken parts, your DevCon 2-ton epoxy, simple foil paper. You're going to be using toothpick, whatever you want to use to make it totally up to you. And then you're going to be using wax paper. Plain old boring wax paper. It helps things to not stick to itself, and it makes the release a lot easier on the wrist. Okay. So again, with these repairs, you're going to be using a shit ton of this stuff, so make sure you get your ratios correct. You're going to slather both ends because you want this to stick to itself very, very well. So, I'll put this on pause. You don't want to watch me squeeze. This is boring as fuck. Okay. So, again, you're going to be using quite a bit. Take a toothpick or whatever mixing tool you're going to use and thoroughly get this stuff mixed together. I'm in Vegas. It's a tad bit warm in here because I need to get an air conditioner into this shop. But good news is that your epoxy will probably start setting right away. Good news and bad news, obviously. Good news because it sets right away. Bad news because it's going to start to be setting fast, which means you have to work semi-quickly. With the DevCon, it's equal parts. You can just eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect, even though they have little measuring pips on the end of on the sides of the bottle. So again, you're just literally getting this stuff into your stock. Again, don't be afraid to be messy. You're going to be dressing this up anyway because you're going to have to. So, and once you get a good compression on the stock, it's going to squeeze a lot of the epoxy out. So, I know this is probably tedious to watch, so bear with me. And if you run out, just mix up more. But you just want to do it semi-quickly so that way your epoxy doesn't completely set up and then start to harden before you've had a chance to mix up your second batch. Looks like we might have enough for this. It doesn't need to be super, super thick. It just needs to be enough to cover the different parts that you are epoxying together so that way you get a good bond. People say, what about Gorilla Glue? What about wood glues? That stuff is fucking useless. I'll just tell you right now. It foams, it gets everywhere. Epoxy is the only way to go for repair, pretty much in my opinion, for any repair on a wood stock. I use leather dyes to finish. The alcohol will actually penetrate. You're going to actually have to do some follow-up on this because as the epoxy shrinks, it will actually go into the recesses, which is good because then what you can do is you can take your donor stock, you can sand a bunch of pieces off, and you can use that you can use the chips from that to actually fill the areas that are low. So it sort of starts to make the repair invisible. All right, so you see we have a nice pretty thick coating of epoxy. Again, if you're messy, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal because you're going to be sanding and filing this down in order to make it work. If you get epoxy up in the screw hole channel for the thing, again, don't worry about that. You can dress that up with a file and make this repair perfect. So again, you're taking this and you're going to slide it forward. That. Okay. Now what we're going to do, excuse me, what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of wax paper. We're going to wrap it around the wrist. You don't need a lot. Try not to use the wax paper too thick to where it will obscure the repair. You need to make sure that these two ends are nice and tight together. And the only way you can do that is if you use a thinner piece of wax paper. So you can actually see through on your stock. Okay. I'm going to wrap this, push this forward, and then I'm going to use one clamp on the side. Try to get away from me. I'm going to use one clamp on the side to hold the two major parts together. Okay. You can also, and you may have to, use a mallet to tap the pieces together to make sure you have a good tight seal. Let me go find my mallet while you guys. I'm a little iffy on how this is holding, so I'm actually going to put a couple pieces of string, tie the shit out of this thing, and then clamp it. That way we can ensure that this bitch is going to stay in one piece. We want this thing to be as strong as possible before we start the reinforcing process. Once it's dry, we'll do the reinforcing with epoxy or with epoxy dowel rod and screws. You need to at least get this thing together before you can start getting the various parts to line up properly. If you're a little unsure as far as how close you need it, you can actually just take it at the top of your mallet and you can tap it together. Preferably put the nose on the ground, tap it down, and that'll get it nice and tight. See right there, I'm not really content with that, so this needs to be kind of jockeyed back into place. I'm going to put another piece of string around that, wrap the hell out of it, and with any luck, once this is apart, you will have a wrist that looks about as aligned as it can get. And again, you can also, you may have to readjust your clamps as well. Don't be afraid to do that. And what some people will do is we'll take this. This off to the side. You can actually take this and use it to get your stock dialed in. So what do you do with this? You take it and you start, I might have to pop this thing loose. You can take this and you can start twisting it. The twisting action will tighten the string and will actually start bringing those two pieces together. We have a bit of a gap there, which is mostly okay. A little bit tighter. Okay, so that's going to hold. You can tie that off with the string if you want. I'm still not fully 100% not 100% cool with that gap. Looks like we have good contact there, but I'm just going to tap this forward. There, that's better. You can see where it's actually making better contact with the wood. Slightly unfortunate thing with the repair like this is that the repair may try to get away from you, and you have to be careful. The wood will have a tendency to want to, if it's like this, it'll, you know, if this is tight, when you start to crank everything down, the wood's going to want to actually start to go like this. So you have to make sure that that thing stays tight. Otherwise, you're going to have to break it and start over, sort of like a doctor breaking a leg to try to fix it. It's not pleasant. for anybody involved. So I'm just going to tie this back, so that way this doesn't move until it's done. Okay, I'm going to verify. So again, I don't have too much of a gap there, which is okay. That's exactly what I want. I'm going to see if I can tap this. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to lock the wood together. You know, the fortunate thing of this is that the type of damage that was done to it wasn't a clean break, it was a sliding break, which means that you have pieces of wood that you can lock in, that you can actually drill into and lock together. So I'm going to put one clamp here, and what this is going to do is this is going to lock these two pieces like that. And you may find that your wood gets temperamental and doesn't want to lock together, which is okay. We have ways of fixing that. Okay, so when I locked this up, where the epoxy was in the crack started to squeeze out. That's a good sign, because that shows me that the epoxy is being forced into the areas to where the voids are starting to squeeze out. You can see here, you probably don't know what I'm looking at, but right here, over time this wood has sort of warped. So what we're going to do is we're going to force that fucker back into place. And I'm going to take this one and put it here. You also have to be careful with this, is that you don't want to over clamp. You don't want to start destroying the wood that's on there. You just want to give it enough of a clamping surface to where it'll hold itself together. You may find that these will be not as cooperative at times. You may have to just kind of keep readjusting your clamps until you get it where you want, which it's not doing right now. There's a certain amount of trial and error in this as well, as you can tell. You get it. If this is not working for you with this end, just flip that fucker around and put the flatter end there. The main thing you want to do, there we go. The main thing you want to do is just get your wood nice and tight. And if this is not working there, you can actually even put this thing inside here if you want to get a little more clamping surface. This actually might work better. This might slightly deform on the inside, but that's okay. And like I said, this is not an exact science. You may end up screwing around with it a bit until you get it where you want it. And you get this thing to hold, which it doesn't want to do. Let's see. This does not want to work. So we're going to try a different clamp. Hold on a sec. I normally have a number of clamps that I are at my disposal. These also work good. These have pivoting jaws. And sometimes you have an area that just wants to be a fucking stubborn bitch. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes these will work. trick is getting this thing to lock in properly, which is being hesitant about doing. I'm going to play with this for a minute, and once I get it to my satisfaction, I'm going to come back so that way you're not watching me fight with this and want to put a bullet in the stock. Give me a couple minutes, I'll be back and I'll show you exactly what I did, so that way you'll know what's what, so stand by. Okay, we are back. I know this looks janky as hell, but at the end it's holding. I had some issues because of these sloped sloped clamping surfaces. Oh, let me sit down. So what I ended up doing is taking some wood blanks, and I used those to kind of hold everything together. Again, their main focus is to ensure that your stock is just being held together until the epoxy dries. So I have a couple of different clamps on here. They're all doing their job. They're all holding. Again, this looks terrible, I know, I admit. But the main thing is that the stock is being held together from side to side, and partially from a diagonal to get those pieces locked in. We're going to let this sit. I'm going to put this somewhere carefully so that it doesn't slip. You know, again, I used this piece of flat wood. Some people will do it on both sides. Unfortunately, with this type of brake, it didn't really allow me to. But what this does is that it gives you a flat clamping surface for the clamp to kind of bite into your stock without having issues with the clamp slipping, which is what I was having, which sometimes happens on these. So we're going to come back. We will take this apart. We're going to just leave it there carefully. But I don't know, 12 hours or so. Again, what we're doing with this is we're doing a very basic repair on this, as far as to just get the two halves together. Once the two halves are together and they're nice and clamped and they're tight like this is, then we can actually begin the strengthening process of the wrist and the repair process to make sure that this thing never breaks again. And then finally what we'll do is we'll end up, once we take everything off, we're going to dress everything up, we're going to stain it, we're going to plug any holes, replace any missing wood, and then finally we'll do the duffel cut repair, super simple. And then when all is said and done, we'll have one nice piece of beautiful Danish wood that has been restored in its strength and its looks, so that way we can actually use it on a functioning rifle.